Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
That's better. It's Black History Month, y'all. We gotta have some energy out there for this topic tonight, which is focused on the works of the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. And many of you who voted to elect Mary Moriarty as the Hennepin County Attorney with this focus on wanting to see a paradigm shift with regard to criminal justice and police accountability here in Hennepin County. So it's an honor to be here with you all. My name is Nakima Lee Armstrong. I'm a civil rights attorney, activist, resident of North Minneapolis, and also the founder of the Racial Justice Network. We partnered with Communities United Against Police Brutality to bring this forum to you tonight so that we can have an opportunity to hear directly from Mary about her office's priorities. I'm going to ask some questions that my team came up with to Mary, and then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A with you all so that you can ask Mary what you want to know about what's happening in her office. I've been very thankful to see Mary's responsiveness when people from the community reach out to her and request meetings and talking through various issues. That is something that we have not experienced over the last several decades through previous county attorneys. And so it is refreshing to see, at a minimum, right, some responsiveness, but also seeing action towards some of the goals that Mary is setting out to accomplish. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll ask Mary to provide any opening remarks, and then we'll get right into the questions. Thank you guys again for being here tonight.
Thank you. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Nakima, and thank you, Michelle, your organization, for co-sponsoring this. I love the Capri. I had my swearing in here, so it's really nice to be back. I am
A little bit louder.
Sure. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. We have, our first year, we spent a lot of time. I was just talking to Kima about coming into the office and trying to find out what is the process for X, and finding out there really was no process. And so we put in a lot of work. We have an amazing team, some of whom are here tonight, but they've put in a lot of work to put in place processes to make the system fairer. And the legislature last session gave us a lot of new tools that we are implementing and we're excited about. So I want to cut this short and get to questions because I'm really excited to talk about what we're doing and to hear what your questions are as well.
Awesome. So what I'm going to ask folks to do, if you will, is to go on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, go to the Listen Media USA page and share the live stream for those who could not make it tonight so that they can watch what is happening here. So if you guys would take a moment and share it, encourage people to watch, I would appreciate it. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. My first question is, what were your first year priorities and how have you made progress on them?
It's funny to say we have a lot of priorities, but as I said, one of the big ones, we have about 500 employees, 500 staff, and we have many different divisions. Most people think of us as doing prosecution, right? But we have child support, we have mental health, we have child protection, and each of those divisions plays a different role and important roles, like child protection, taking kids away from their families. And so we had to spend some time trying to figure out what exactly are the processes in this office and who handles what. We took several months to develop a new strategic plan, a new vision and mission statement that we'd be happy to provide. We spent a lot of time on that. Brady was a big issue. Staffing was a big issue. We've been able to hire over 100 new staff. And what we look for with staff are people who are values aligned and interested in doing the work as we see it. In other words, really some of the things based on data, and really trying to examine what works and what doesn't work. And that's been a big focus. We've done so many different things. Sometimes but first of all, let me say, I completely changed the org chart. The office traditionally has had 2 deputies, civil and criminal. And was very hierarchical. So everything kind of started down here and went up. I changed the org chart to flatten out. We do have 2 deputies, but they are on the same line as the rest of our directors. We are fortunate to steal away Jen White, who's in the front row there. And yeah, shout out to Jen. I looked at the org chart and I found 1.5 FTEs for community engagement in the entire office. And that was buried in child support, I think. And so what we did was elevate community engagement, community affairs to a director level position. And we were fortunate to hire Jen away to do that. We also created a brand new professional standards division. The office had never had that. And that houses our training. The office really had no training before. It houses what will be our conviction integrity unit, prosecutor-initiated sentencing adjustment, Brady, all of those things. So we created 2 divisions that had never existed before. So those are just several of the things that we've done.
Mm-hmm. What about diversity within your office as you guys have increased your hiring?
Yes, it's diversity. So one of the things, ironically, as you know, I was chief public defender for a while, and I spent a lot of my time arguing for salary parity for public defenders with the county attorney's office. Last session, the legislature gave a bunch of money to the public defender's office, and now they make a lot more than our staff.
Wow.
So, yes. So, in fact, we lost one of our prosecutors to a $40,000 raise to the public defender's office. So now I'm working on salary parity for our staff. What we're finding, and this is interesting, there's actually a law review article about this, that people who go to law school, there are fewer passing the bar, but people who want to come into criminal work want to be public defenders. They don't want to be prosecutors. And so that's changed. You know, in the past you could have hundreds of applications if we posted. We do still have a lot of applications, and we've been very fortunate in being able to hire people who really want to work in a different kind of prosecutor's office. But having said that, we have to pay people well, and this is where attracting diversity comes into play. We also have to retain people. And one of the really interesting things I discovered when I came in, and I suppose if I had thought about this, it would have come to me, but I didn't really know it until I got into the office. The Jamar Clark to Noor to George Floyd and everything that was in between really caused a lot of trauma in the office, particularly with our staff of color. And I've heard over and over that staff of color just don't feel like it's their office. That some are embarrassed to identify themselves as working for the county attorney's office. And so we have a lot of work to do in making the office, recruiting, first of all, and retaining people and making them feel like this is their office too. I think it's going to be a struggle because, and I heard one of our supervisors say this morning, we had a youth symposium last week. And we had the head of the federal government, head of juvenile prosecution essentially, come to town and support what we're doing on youth prosecution. But a lot of our staff was there, particularly in youth prosecution, and some feedback I heard was one of our staff saying it's really hard to be a Black lawyer and be in prosecution. Even if you're trying to do the right thing, even if you're trying to reform, it's still very tough because, unfortunately, a lot of people that you see look like you. So we have a long ways to go to create an environment that's trauma-informed and supportive of all of our staff. So that's something we're going to continue to work on.
Where have you made the biggest progress with regard to criminal justice reform, from your perspective?
So a huge issue, which is going to be ongoing for some time, is how do you change a culture? How do you change the culture from kind of a punitive, we're here, and I'm talking about criminal prosecution, to prosecute people and we're seeking the longest sentences possible, to what our framework now, which is what problem are we trying to solve? What are we doing? We have to be able to answer that question. Why are we doing a particular thing? Why did we charge this case? Why are we asking for this? And what problem are we trying to solve? And I think we're doing a pretty good job of changing that culture. Part of it has to do with the number of hires we've had come in who are values aligned and really want to do something different. But culture change takes a long time, and there's some resistance to that. I think one of the most difficult things can be if you are in a career, and I was in public defense for some time, I can think back on, early in my career, I never challenged fingerprints because we were all told that fingerprints were infallible. And we know they're not, right? And so at some point, I educated myself about that, and I started challenging them. I actually challenged fingerprints in our Court of Appeals. But for a long time, I didn't. And so there are many things that we do that we can look back on in the criminal legal system where we can realize, well, I thought I was doing the right thing, or I thought whatever, but I did harm. And I think we have to maintain humility to be able to acknowledge, maybe I thought that was right at the time, but it wasn't, and I have to do better. And so that's a struggle sometimes when you think, hey, I was seeking these really long prison sentences because I thought that was the right thing to do. Or we were prosecuting all these low-level drug cases because I thought that was the right thing to do. And we now know, sending people to jail for drug cases is not going to help them with addiction. So we have a lot of work to do in continuing to nudge people. I think you know this. The system has just kind of functioned the way it functions without a lot of thought into, is what we're doing actually working? Mm-hmm. So we're continuing to work on that.
Mm-hmm. So I noticed that you use the terminology criminal legal system instead of criminal justice system. Can you educate people about why you use that particular terminology?
Sure. For many people, the criminal legal system has had no justice attached to it. So I think rather than saying criminal justice system, which has not provided justice for many, it's more accurate to say criminal legal system.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the roadblocks that you have encountered in terms of trying to push for the changes that you want to see within the system?
Yeah, that started out in my first week. We actually had a prosecutor lie to a judge in a sexual assault trial. And, the interesting thing about that is the decision we ultimately made was very victim-centered. And because it was victim-centered, we didn't share widely what was happening in the trial. We ended up dismissing the case, and that ended up being we don't care about victims. So that started out there.
Was that a minor who was the victim?
It was. And we, like I said, I believe it was my third day in office. And that decision to dismiss was actually made by a group of us, a team of our supervisors. That was, imagine me getting there, and I don't know the supervisors, and we're all kind of thrust into the situation, trying to figure out how to salvage this case, but also be victim-centered. And I feel we did the right thing there that was victim-centered. And because it's victim-centered, we can't talk, or I won't talk about some of the facts that led us to that decision. But it ended up being all this criticism about you don't care about victims. And then, less than a month later, we had two really well-publicized youth cases involving murder. Both actually had to do Both cases had to do with 15-year-olds who were accused of murder, who were charged with murder. And one of the things that we came into office to change was our approach to youth justice. And part of that is recognizing that youth are youth, kids are kids, no matter what they do. And I know we encountered a lot of resistance on that, even among our staff. People think, well, yes, treat kids like kids until a certain point where they cross a certain line, where actually we know, because of brain development, all of that, no matter what kids do as youth, they are capable of change. They are capable of rehabilitation. And so we made some decisions in some youth cases that brought a lot of attention. And so we had a lot of work to do with our staff, a lot of work to do with the public to educate people about, or talk to people about, hey, why are we doing this? It's not because we don't care about victims or victims' families. Our job, though, my job, what I was elected to do, was to look at public safety. And so because of that, I have to look at the particular person who committed this crime. What is it that we can do to solve a problem? And with youth that are 15, we can send them to prison, and we know the outcomes. They're going to get out in their early 30s probably, and the outcomes are terrible. They almost always go back to prison. Or we can do our best to rehabilitate them and support them in that rehabilitation so that they will be safe when they reenter the community. Now, that's hard for families, and I talk to families frequently who are upset because they feel that we're not listening to what they say. And I think there's kind of a misunderstanding about that. Yes, we have to listen. Yes, I do meet with families, and I hear them. But hearing their grief and holding space for that pain is very different than doing everything that they want us to do. I met with one mother recently who said she wanted the death penalty. And we don't have the death penalty here, which I support. And we don't have it for good reasons.
You're not saying you support the death penalty.
No.
You're saying you support that we don't have the death penalty.
Yes, we should not have the death penalty. It's applied in a very racist way. I don't believe that killing people to prove that killing people is the right thing to do. But I understood her grief. I understood why she was asking for that. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean we do that. And so my job is to create the space to hear the pain, the grief from victims, and their families, but ultimately decide what is in the public interest, the best public interest of public safety in this particular case. So we made a lot of progress, and I mentioned this youth symposium we had. What was interesting about that is, so we had the head of juvenile justice from the DOJ, Department of Justice, and there was something to some people about the fact, and there was one comment made by a reporter saying, oh, there's a method to your madness. So you get somebody from the outside coming in saying, hey, we're totally aligned with what you're doing. And then people will say, oh, you're not, this.
It's not coming from out of left field.
Right, it's not
coming out of left field. But you're looking at science.
Yes.
In terms of your decision making.
Yes.
And I think that, so you guys recall the incident that Mary is talking about where I think she was a young Black woman who was a mother who wound up being shot and killed. And there were a couple of teenagers, one of whom wound up pulling the trigger, but there was an adult who was apparently encouraging or influencing them. And so your strategy was to go harder on the adult who was responsible and to allow the children to go through more of a juvenile process as opposed to an adult prison sentence. That was a huge paradigm shift compared to how the county attorney's office normally operated. And of course, there was a lot of outrage from members of the community, but also family members of the young woman who was killed. Because what they were looking at was if this person, whether it's a child or an adult, if they pull the trigger, they should have to spend X amount of years behind bars. And I think one of the things that was interesting was that we saw the governor move hastily in comparison to other circumstances to remove that case from your office and into the hands of the Attorney General. Now, I kind of joked about hastily because, you know, anybody who's been watching what's been happening with police accountability, we've had to apply a lot of pressure for the governor to intervene and to get the Attorney General to intervene. Even with, you know, we did it once with, after George Floyd was killed in terms of putting pressure on the governor to take that case from Mike Freeman. And then we did it again after Daunte Wright was killed. And at that point, both the governor and the Attorney General said no. And they were adamant that the Attorney General would not take that case. And so we had to use some different tactics and go to the prosecutor's house multiple times for him to finally relinquish the case. And that's how the AG got the case. And so in this situation, we were thinking, how are you all able to move so quickly to shift this case when that has not been your normal practice? And I thought about everything Mike Freeman essentially got away with without any higher level intervention by the governor or anyone else. So can you take us back to that period of time of some of the dynamics and your reaction to them taking the case and further politicizing a very tragic situation?
It was a tragic situation, and there were two youth that were manipulated by the ex-boyfriend of this young woman who was murdered. One of the youths was 15, the other was, I think, 17. And, you know, sometimes it's helpful for people to know that the adult provided the gun, drove them over there. The plan, and this is part of the problem when you have 15-year-olds with a gun. Things did not go as planned. The 15-year-old not only ended up shooting the woman, he shot his brother in the leg, too. People don't know that. It was chaotic. You know, it's been described as some kind of execution. It was not. It was a chaotic scene that you might imagine with a 15-year-old who thinks they're going over there to do something and things don't go the way they're planned. So we looked at his history. And, you know, it's probably important to say that we have certified youth since I've been county attorney.
What does that mean for those who may not be familiar with that certification language?
Move the court to treat them as adults. And we have sent juveniles or youth after they've been certified to prison. And I hate that. I hate it. We also don't have the tools to keep some youth safe. We just don't have them. And we've been doing a lot of advocacy to get those tools. And, you know, the truth is we fail youth all the time because I look at these what are called certification studies. So somebody from probation does a study, like a whole history on this youth, and I look at those and I see all these failures. That's what they're characterized of the youth. Youth failed this, youth failed that. And I always think, was it the youth that failed or was it us that failed? Because this kid got to that point. And we're not at the point where we are working with youth really, really well who are in risky situations. And sometimes they just have a really long history. They're 17. Another thing that would be helpful is if we could have jurisdiction. So when a kid turns 18, they're an adult. Even if we, there's some things we can do to extend that jurisdiction, but not long. And so you have a kid who's 17 who's committed a violent act and has this horrific history. We have sent youth like that to prison. And I don't want to do that because that's not in the best interest of public safety. In any event, we looked at this youth's history, this 15-year-old. We looked at the fact that he was manipulated by this adult, provided the gun, driven over there, driven away. We filed charges, murder charges against the adult. we were prepared to indict him before a grand jury because this was a domestic violence case. We take those very seriously. And then when we informed the family that we were going to not certify the case, that's when the Attorney General got involved and the governor got involved. That was very quick, although it did, I think, in our world, take about 3 or 4 weeks of trying to convince the governor and the Attorney General that this was a really bad idea. This was my 2nd month. So I'm newly elected county attorney. I have talked about a different approach to youth. I'm a woman, and I'm gonna tell you, I don't think this ever would have happened to a man. I don't see that at all. And they're taking a case away in, now the Minnesota County Attorneys Association adamantly opposed them taking the case away because we county attorneys, and there are 87 of us, are elected by the people in our county. And I was elected talking about these things. And if people are unhappy about that, they can unelect me, not re-elect me. It was a political decision, which is really, I have to tell you, when I think about this case, I think about the tragedy of it, and I think most people don't know this. The 15-year-old was scheduled to go to court Friday morning. Thursday afternoon, his lawyer spent the afternoon preparing him to go to court and what was going to happen. We received notice late Thursday that the governor was taking the case away. Can you imagine? And I know I have empathy for that 15-year-old child, right? Who was told this is what's going to happen, and then it didn't happen. He's still sitting there not knowing what's going to happen to him.
Wow.
He is still in the juvenile detention center. And his certification hearing, because the AG is trying to certify him as adult, is happening next week, I understand.
Wow.
So, we need to have space. We need to hold space for the tragedy. And I can't imagine what it's like for the family, for the sister to have lost their loved one. We can hold that and also try to hold space for the circumstances in which this tragic event happened. Hold that youth accountable, because youth do need to be held accountable for their actions, but recognize what makes sense in terms of public safety, in terms of rehabilitation. And so it was a terrible situation for me, brand new, they come in and take the case away, it's publicized everywhere. And one of the things I promised myself coming into this role, and I used to talk about it during the campaign as saying, I'm not political. And people were saying, yes, you are. You probably said that to me, yes, you are. So what I did promise myself was that we would not make decisions for political purposes. There were times in that 3 weeks when I could have, had I agreed to certify that kid, they would not have taken the case away. I was under a lot of pressure to do things to keep this out of the media. And I cannot tell you how stressful that was for me and our entire team.
Right.
But we stuck to our values and our beliefs. And I can tell you, after 1 year in office, I can look myself in the eyes, in the mirror, and know that the decisions that we made this last year were values aligned, and we never caved to political pressure.
I just thank you for that explanation, because many of us didn't get the opportunity to hear directly from you. We just saw the headlines and saw the press conferences and all of the negative narratives. So we're grateful that you unpacked things and you showed your human side. Like, this did affect me. And even being a woman and knowing, that's the first thing I thought, that there's no way that they would have done this to a male prosecutor. And just the hypocrisy, like I said, of letting Mike Freeman literally get away with anything under the sun with no real intervention. Even with George Floyd, the AG's office kept trying to insert him back into the case. when he botched it the first time around, which I just could not understand. And so this is definitely a political position. And some of the biases that people have, even with the fact that you used to be the chief public defender, right? Which comes with its own, I would say, narrative around how people might perceive your views on public safety. Is that something that you have had to experience with the public, with colleagues, with other elected officials, like pushing back against that narrative?
Oh, yes, very publicized. That actually came up in this case we're talking about and another youth case we're talking about. And, when families are upset, understandably, and they go to the press, that's probably the most common thing that people say is, you're still a public defender. You don't understand your role. And the way I answer that is, I sometimes look at the number of people we've sent to prison, and I say, I am not a public defender anymore. But my role is different. When I was a public defender, I represented one client at a time, and my role was to represent them as best I could. That is not my role as county attorney. My role, and this is actually why this job can be really, really difficult. Everything is tragic. When we charge, we handled the Deshaun Hill trial, right? Guy was convicted, went to prison for a long period of time. That's not something I feel good about, right? He needs to be there. He needs to be incapacitated because he's not safe. But Deshaun Hill's not coming back. And I look at these cases, I hear about them, we talk about them every week, and we are never able to bring people back. And the tools that we have are never going to be enough to start the healing for a family. And so I approach this role as I have to look at public safety. And that is why there have been times we have certified youth. Because if I'm looking at public safety and I look at this youth and I see, do we have the resources to be able to help him? It's usually a him. And the answer is no. Then I have to do things that I don't want to do. Because I have to be looking at public safety. I think the big difference, the thing that people don't get, is that I bring a lens where I sat next to clients and I would talk to them about their histories and hear all kinds of trauma, and often thought to myself, if we had intervened when this person was young, when he was in foster care, when he was sexually abused, when all this stuff happened, he wouldn't be sitting next to me.
Right.
And so I understand that there isn't a perpetrator and a victim, like a pristine, stereotypical victim. Hurt people hurt people. We have a victim today who might be somebody who harms somebody else tomorrow. And so I bring that lens of understanding how people get themselves or how they end up in these situations. And
mental health is also
huge.
a huge aspect.
Huge. And so what I think people are starting to connect is, if you talk about effective ways of intervening, that's actually public safety. It's not different. It's like people say, well, you're soft on crime, that kind of thing. No, we're effective on crime. We're effective. And effectiveness is about prevention. It's about intervening in effective ways. And when you have to, it can be about incapacitating people who just aren't safe in the community. And I will say, we could talk about our youth auto initiative, but one of the things I love about that, we can look at the data and say, this is successful. If you looked at the data, if you look at it now, people coming out of prison, how many people go back? How many people pick up something? What we call recidivism rates are really high. So what we've been doing in this system for decades has harmed people, and we are not safer.
And it's expensive. It's expensive on top
right.
of the harm.
And we have the highest prison population rate in the world, and we are definitely not the safest country in the world. So what we've been doing hasn't worked. It's been harmful, particularly to people of color. And so we do need to do something different, something that works.
Mm-hmm. So before we started this conversation, you were talking about a change that happened at the legislature that will provide some level of relief for people who were peripherally involved in felony murder cases. So one, can you talk about that change? And, I don't know if you want to share, that you had your first case like that today. And then I want to shift into talking about the prosecutor-initiated sentence adjustment. I don't know if you guys were able to pick up a flyer, but make sure that you grab one at the end. And I'm going to have Mary talk about this as one of the new initiatives coming out of her office.
So because so many people were sent to prison, are still there on really, really long sentences. And by the way, we know that from research, there's a period of time you can sentence somebody, and beyond that, it doesn't do anything. It's just harmful. It costs money, as you say. So we have a lot of people who were sentenced to really long prison terms. And this year, the legislature gave us a couple of tools. I'll be talking about that one. But one of the tools that they gave us is this. How many of you have heard of the concept of felony murder? So those are situations where you're with somebody, a pal, and you go out and you are maybe going to do a drug deal, get some drugs, something like that. Your partner goes off and shoots somebody or something like that. Historically, this office, our office, and offices throughout the state have charged both people with the same crime. And that has meant, actually, paradoxically, so a lot of times if you're the person who fired the gun and there's a good case against you, you take a plea negotiation because you know you're not going to prevail at trial. And then the person who really was kind of along for the ride says, wait, because the law says you actually get the same sentence. And it's up to the prosecutor to decide to give you some lesser part of the sentence, but legally you can get exactly the same sentence as the person who is the leader of this. And so what you see is people who are like, what do you mean you want me to go to prison? I was just in the car. I thought we were going over there to get some drugs, and then this turned into something else. So that's called felony murder. Our legislature changed that. Going forward, you have to be what's called a major participant to be prosecuted for felony murder. And so so people who are eligible, and this gets complicated, so I'll be kind of high level about it. People who were convicted of felony murder can petition their county attorney. There's a process to go through. There's a petition if we feel that the person should be resentenced. We did make that recommendation in a case, our very first case heard in Minnesota, actually, this morning, and that person was resentenced and I believe was released from prison this morning.
That's a huge shift, guys, compared to how it has been. And I think the other context around the felony murder charges is that a lot of this had to do with the 90s getting tough on crime. Yeah. Minneapolis being called Murderapolis. And there's still so many, I would say primarily black men in their 40s and early 50s who are incarcerated under those kinds of circumstances. Sometimes they were just in the car with someone not knowing a murder was going to take place and they were being charged. Other times, there are circumstances where it's mistaken identity and, or informant being used inappropriately in that, or the role of Minneapolis Police Department, which y'all already know. But all of those things have played a role in terms of what our prisons still look like decades later because the wrongs had not been corrected. So this is one of the first major steps in terms of correcting those injustices for people who have been incarcerated with this frenzy around getting tough on crime.
Kima, these are all corrective programs that we're talking about, but I do want to say this, we have brought a new approach. In the past, I think it's safe to say that the office would charge aiding and abetting. If there were 5 people there, 5 people would get charged, right? We are taking a new look at those. So we will look at what each person did. what role did each person actually play, if any? And right when I started, we made the decision not to charge a couple of people with aiding and abetting murder, because they just were actually there. And we couldn't really prove, I suppose we could maybe prove, like the office would have, they were there kind of thing, but it wasn't appropriate to charge them with aiding and abetting murder. So we, going forward, have looked at each person to see what their actual involvement is, so that we aren't prosecuting people willy-nilly on aiding and abetting, because that has the same sentence as well.
Wow.
So on the
So guilty by association
yes,
had been the standard practice.
So we are not doing that anymore, and so I will say going forward this entire year, we are looking at those. So there's the corrective action to try to correct what's happened in the past, and then there's a different philosophy going forward.
Thank you for sharing that. Can you talk about the prosecutor-initiated sentence adjustment?
Yes, PISA. It's a mouthful. So this is actually called prosecutor-initiated resentencing in the rest of the country, and I think actually Ramsey County calls it that too. Our legislature, the bill was actually called prosecutor-initiated sentencing adjustment, and I think that's an important distinction. Labels kind of matter. So that's what we're calling it, PISA. What does that mean? There are, as we've talked about, people who are in prison for really long periods of time, and they don't need to be there anymore. They're safe, they can be safe in the community, or they're having health problems. They just don't need to be there anymore. And a key component of this is that in Minnesota, we have what are called the sentencing guidelines. If you get sentenced on a felony, if you go to prison in Minnesota, you will do 2/3 of your sentence, and then you'll get out the last third on what we call supervised release. We don't have parole in Minnesota. And you hear this on TV and in other states, somebody gets sentenced to 10 to 30 years. And what that means is that at 10 years, you come before a parole board, and that parole board, theoretically, I don't know that it always works like this, but can look at your history and see what you've done in prison, especially for youth. We know there's a lot of growth when people go to prison as youth. We know that people age out of crime. So when you have a parole board, they are able to go back and see, is this person safe to be in the community? Up until this legislation, we haven't had that ability, because you do 2/3 of your time and that's it, unless there was something wrong legally with your conviction. So now the legislature has given us PISA, and the concept there is that we can look at people's convictions, and essentially we can petition the court to adjust their sentence, as opposed to resentencing. Because sometimes people think, well, why are you resentencing? And we aren't. We're looking at this person's history, and should there be an adjustment based on what we now know? And so the way this works, we got all the data from the Department of Corrections. We know who's there in prison, on what, how old they were when they got there, how old they are now, all of this data. And what we are doing is and we're just putting up an application process next week. I think we're working out with the prisons that the application is available for people who don't have access to computers. But the idea is, if we look at a case, we ask for the file from the prison. We will look at that file, and because we know that infractions at prison are not necessarily indicative of how somebody's doing, we'll look at that, but we'll also look at what have they been doing in prison? How are they now? We look at reentry plans a little bit, and ultimately, we reach out to the potential victim, if there was a victim or victims' families, to see what they have to say about it. And if we think it's appropriate, we will petition the judge to adjust the sentence. Now, we haven't had one of those yet, and ultimately it's up to the judge to decide. But it is a wonderful way of looking at some of the long sentences or sentences that people got and seeing how they're doing and if they can be safe in the community, getting their sentence adjusted so that they can go home.
Do they have to submit a petition, or how do you even find out which cases should
Yes.
qualify?
2 ways. So we, as I mentioned, we got all the data. We were trying to think of, because part of this is going to be a resource issue for us, we were trying to figure out what classification of cases can we look at or can we start with? Is it people who are over 60? Is it people who got in as a teenager? What is that? So we've looked at all the data. We also, as I said, we're gonna put up the application. People can fill out an application. It's not meant to be a barrier. It's meant to be very simple. If people just give us basic information, we can help with that. The other thing is, we don't want, and this has happened to families, as you know, they pay a lot of money to hire a lawyer to try to do post-conviction or make their case. While people can hire lawyers, that's not gonna get them to the front of the line. Because we are working out a process where we will get people lawyers if they want a lawyer, but we don't want people who
Who have some privilege or some advantage.
Yeah. And we don't want families to have to spend that money. I've heard countless stories of families who have given money and just haven't really gotten much of anything. I should make this distinction. So PISA, the sentencing, the idea is you were guilty of what you did, but your sentence is too long, okay? So we could also talk about, we're working on getting a conviction integrity unit ready. That's probably coming at the end of this year. That is for innocence claims. So just, and I know it gets confusing, but there are these other avenues now. Even if you are guilty, I mean, that's what the assumption is, that you did something or you did what you got in prison for. It's that the sentence was too long, or maybe at the time it seemed like it was appropriate, but we look at it and it just isn't appropriate now. So in terms of correcting these long prison sentences, we now have a couple of tools that we didn't have before.
Okay, thank you for that. How can people who want to submit a case for review get in touch with your office
So
on a PISA claim?
yeah, on a PISA claim, we've been working with Department of Corrections because people don't, we're going to have an online application, but we understand that people don't have access to the computer. So we're getting paper applications, and I think they're going to help distribute those.
Okay, that's good to know. And maybe from a community-based perspective, there are ways that we can play a role in terms of helping to streamline the process.
That's a really good point too, because we don't want the only people to apply are people that heard about it, and we don't want to leave out people who didn't hear about it. So that's another reason why we're trying to go through classifications of cases too.
Mhm.
There may be people who just don't have people out here to advocate for them.
Right.
We don't want to leave them out.
Absolutely, and we can't solely rely on the Department of Corrections for very obvious reasons. So we'll follow up to see how, as a community, we can provide support. I want to cover 2 more topics with you, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. You talked a lot about Brady in the past. Can you talk to people about what the Brady law entails? Why is it important? And any changes that your office has made around Brady?
Yes. So Brady, Giglio, they're actually names of cases, okay? But what do they signify? Essentially, they tell us, prosecutors, the Supreme Court has told us that we have an obligation to seek out information from the team. The team is very broadly described. The prosecution team includes law enforcement, okay? Even though they don't work for us, it includes anyone on the prosecution team. We are required to hand over information to the defense that might potentially be favorable to the defense. So, I have been very outspoken about this issue. When I was chief public defender, there were a couple of cases that came up. I remember one in particular, a nurse at Hennepin County who was doing sexual assault examinations was fired and lied on her resume, if I recall. And that was not disclosed to us, and she was an expert in a bunch of cases that we had. And that was a violation of Brady, because obviously, as a defense lawyer, you would want that information so that you can cross-examine, or you can do something with it. So I wondered about the Brady policy when I got into office, and so what the policy sort of had been, there's a difference between public and non-public information. So when a police officer is disciplined by the chief and that discipline becomes public, that's pretty much what the office was turning over to defense. But there are a couple of issues with that, and I should say that Brady has a couple of components. It has to do with what we as prosecutors get and what we as prosecutors disclose or hand over to the defense. So this was an issue of great importance to me, and it took a long time. We're still in the process of we've really developed the policy, but we have something like 38 different law enforcement entities in Hennepin County. So we have to work with all of them. We had to work with a system internally that only collected the public information, they didn't collect any of the private stuff. And here's why that's a problem. For some agencies, like MPD, we've all heard the stories about coaching, right? So what one chief, and I could pick on MPD, but the chief can decide, or by contract too, well, what is appropriate for coaching? What is the disciplinary matrix, right? And whatever they decide is coachable or not really doesn't impact what we have to hand over to the defense. And so we need access to non-public information because that is also discoverable, or we have to hand it over. But the office wasn't getting any of that, and of course wasn't handing it over. Michelle just said he didn't want it.
Right.
Yeah. So the other thing that was problematic was that the only way the defense got it, this information, which was public, was if the defense demanded a hearing, so like a trial, something where witnesses were subpoenaed. And we have a database called Subpoena Plus. You put in the names of witnesses you want to subpoena, and then and only then would a flag come up indicating that you should go talk to your supervisor because there might be Brady material there. Well, the problem with that is most cases actually settled before trial. So there were many, many cases where the person, they settled without ever potentially knowing about this information. So I hope people can kind of get a sense of what a difficult lift this has been. I want to give a big shout out to Claire Deagle, who's the head of our professional standards division, because this has been her project since she got there. So we are at the point where we have been working with law enforcement throughout Hennepin County. I meet with them once a month. Brady was something that we developed with them, got feedback from them, and they've been very compliant about it. So we are getting public information. With non-public information, we have to get a court order. What law enforcement is concerned about is if it is not public, that it not be out there in the ether. So we have to get a protective order from the court. So big picture, our Brady policy is what it should be. It is It fulfills our requirements to go out and find information. Another thing that the office did was have MOUs with every single law enforcement entity, which just required them to send final discipline. So there was no way of knowing, as the case worked through the process, whether there was actually something that the office needed to disclose. So I feel pretty good about where we're at now in terms of collecting the information. We still have some work to do with trying to get the system moved up so that we were getting it to people as early as we want to.
Mm-hmm.
But we've made dramatic changes. I will say, I thought, when I came in and I talked, I knew that all of the police chiefs did not have a good relationship with my predecessor. There was no communication there. So
I'm kind of shocked about that, to be honest. That's another story.
I know. I was kind of too. There was just no communication there whatsoever. And so I listened to them and I said, what do you need from me? And they said, we don't want to hear about policy changes in the newspaper. We'd like to hear them from you first. I said, you got it. And so we told them about our proposed Brady plan, and over a period of months, they gave input, feedback, and so I would say, they are complying. We're pretty much on the same page in terms of compliance, and so it's been a pleasant surprise, perhaps, that we have a much more, I would say progressive, but it actually follows the law.
Might be more transparent than it
Very
has been.
transparent.
That's a huge shift.
Yeah, and that's what, and the other thing is, we don't want to, so why is this important, big picture, right? It's important because there are times, many times, when some conviction is reversed, right? Or there's something going on with a conviction, and then you look in the file and there's stuff that indicated it might have been something else, or indicated that this police officer had done something that should have been disclosed. So this is all about fair trials. If you want to look at it from a prosecutor perspective, we should be caring about fair trials, but we also care about convicting the right person, right?
Right.
And so the defense should have this information. And so us disclosing it does not necessarily mean it comes in. So people might be interested in that. Very often a judge rules it doesn't come in because it's not relevant. And that's fine. I want us to be disclosing information early on. And one of the things that I think was meaningful to police chiefs is, do you really like getting blindsided by questions when your cop's on the stand? No. Do our lawyers really want to deal with this on the eve of their trial? No. Let's hand this stuff over. We can get up and litigate whether it comes in or not. We'll know whether it is, and then we'll deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a much better process for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. It's really interesting to hear you talk about essentially building a rapport with some of the police chiefs and law enforcement agencies. I think you said that there are, is it 38?
About that, yes.
38 agencies that you connect with. Can you describe your approach to working with law enforcement and how you've been able to, I would say, break through some of the barriers?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I have said to them, I know I'm your worst nightmare. I know you didn't want me to win. I know you think I'm out to get you. So let's start there. And I have, that's the elephant in the room, right? And so then they can all laugh and say, yeah, we're worried you're out to get us, kind of thing. And I really believe in transparency. I really believe in that. And so building relationships with them, what I've always said to them is, I am going to be transparent. We are not always going to agree. You can tell me whatever you want to tell me. I'll try to answer your question. But I'm going to be transparent. And I will push back against them if there's something that I disagree with. Oftentimes I find that it's just not understanding what we're doing. So I think, and we've invested a lot of time. Like I said, I meet with them once a month, but it's actually in 4 different groups. So I have 4 meetings with all of the chiefs once a month. And it's paid off in the sense that some of them still don't like me. Some of them still think I'm out to get them. But they agree, hey, you've been really transparent with us. I also assigned one of our experienced lawyers to be a liaison to them. And so sometimes the way this works is one of them will say, well, we're upset about how you're declining our drug cases. And I will say, oh, first I'll say, you should pick up the phone and call us. You have a liaison, you can do that. But Mike Radmer is our liaison. I'll say, Mike, can you check that out? And we'll go get the data. And if it isn't, and Mike will meet with the chief and say, here's the data on what we've declined. And there have been times where they've had a point, and then we will correct that. And there are times when they just think that, and it's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
So transparency and communication is critical. But it's always it's tenuous, I would say, and there are always issues that will come up. But I've always said to them, I'm gonna communicate with you, ask questions. I think the biggest frustration for me is that I make myself available and they don't ask questions. They do kind of a Minnesota passive-aggressive thing. So we just had a meeting today, actually, where we were talking about, okay, how do we get you guys to, because they're mostly guys, ask us questions instead of talking about something and getting yourself whipped up when it really isn't true,
Right.
or we can just talk about it. So it's taken a lot of work, but I think we've mostly reached a point, and there's some, at some point, one of the chiefs said, I think you have about 75% of the chiefs, 15, or the other 25% you're never gonna get. And really, that's about communication. And trusting relationships in that, I'm gonna be honest with you, you're not gonna agree on everything, and if you ask me a question, I'm gonna answer it if I can.
Thank you for that. So one question that comes up has to do with past cases that maybe happened before you became the county attorney involving the police use of deadly force. Does your office plan to set up a process, or do you have a process for potentially evaluating some of those cases where it's clear that something happened that maybe should not have happened, and there needs to still be some accountability?
So I have met with families on some of those cases, and I know that those are, families, it's extremely painful. And my hope is, my answer right now is that we do not have the capacity to be going and looking back at cases involving law enforcement use of force. We have, so we get investigations from the BCA submitted to us. And one of the things I discovered from talking to police chiefs is that before I came, it could take years for the office to make a decision on those. And there are a lot of cases you don't hear about, but and to me, taking a couple of years to make a decision is unacceptable for the family, for the law enforcement officer. And so we've committed to speeding up that process of the current cases that we have, so that law enforcement, family, anybody involved can know we will have a decision by a particular point. So we are very short-staffed, especially, in the area of prosecutors who are experienced in serious cases. Here's another issue. Many of our prosecutors do not want to have anything to do with officer-involved cases. And part of that is that police, and I've heard this in the past, will not work with our staff who prosecute those cases. And so I understand that. I understand some of our staff saying, well, this might be a career-ending thing for me. I understand now, having charged the Trooper case.
In the Ricky Cobb, the second police killing.
the level of but the level of threats and pushback and I'm not going to talk about that case, but there are a lot of pressures, and I understand with our staff, people saying, I don't want to have anything to do with those cases. And why we need to build our capacity to be able to do them, to be able to have the knowledge and the skill set to take a look at them, even some cases that happened before. So,
Especially some cases that happened before.
yeah, no, that's true. And my honest answer is right now, we don't have that capacity. And when I say capacity, what does that mean? It takes a lot of work to look at those types of cases. It takes some expertise in the law because the law is very different. As you know, the law does give law enforcement protections that other people don't have. And so we need to build we need to get people trained. We somehow need to get into a situation where it is acceptable for people to actually work on those cases. And I don't know what the answer to that is. I really don't.
Is there a willingness to set up a process like that? Because there are still so many family members
Yes.
who got no justice.
Yes.
I mean, you look at Terrence Franklin's
Yep.
cases, and
Yes.
it's very clear, even Time Magazine,
Yes.
right, went and looked at the information in the Terrence Franklin case. I mean, the list goes on and
Yes.
on. And I think what we don't want to have happen is because it's too hard or because there's no resources, that killers are essentially walking around free.
Yeah, you asked me if there's a willingness to look at this, and the answer is yes. My hesitation is not even a hesitation when I talk about resources, it is where do we find the people that are willing to do that? Because it costs. You know, like I was talking to somebody about what's happened in the past for people who do prosecute those cases. And law enforcement won't work with them. Or it's kind of a passive aggressive. They're not saying, we're not gonna work with you, but they don't. And so if you are a prosecutor, what do you do? And I know what the answer will be. If you are afraid, hey, I need law enforcement to be able to prosecute my cases, and if I work or prosecute a case like this, they're not gonna work with me, that's where the tension is. And I'm not saying
That person may decide being a prosecutor is no longer for them. But that should not trump, no pun intended, that should not trump whether there is a pursuit of justice in a legitimate case. Because as some of you guys here, you're activists, right? We face retaliation, backlash, and attacks, and we continue to persevere for the cause of justice. And so a prosecutor has to put their own discomfort on the line for the higher goal of achieving justice and sending a message to police officers that we're not going to tolerate the unlawful, unjustified use of deadly force on community members.
I agree. I do agree with that, and I will also say I'm getting death threats. And yes, I agree with you, and I was elected. I can't necessarily say I signed up for this, but it's really unpleasant. It's not even unpleasant. What it's done to my family, my partner, me, it's really hard. And I guess what I would say is we need to create a culture when that stuff isn't okay.
Right.
I should, and our staff shouldn't be threatened. Or all the stuff that's on social media about, and I try not to look at that, but and I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'm also saying the reality of it is who wants to put themselves in this situation knowing that they're gonna face that kind of thing.
That's what we ask ourselves, right? So, like, we can totally relate because we're out here volunteering for, the trauma, the violence, the threats. and everything else, and no one cares if something happens to an activist, right? After putting our bodies and everything
I do.
else on the line. You care, but a lot of people really don't, right? So we see the parallels in terms of counting the cost, but that still should not be a justification for not pursuing justice. You know, when an officer is using deadly force. We are fighting,
A crime is a crime.
right,
It shouldn't matter who commits that crime.
Oh,
You know,
I'm
it's
not
a rich
disagreeing.
person or a poor person or a cop or whatever. A crime's a
Right.
crime.
I'm not disagreeing
Oh, I
with
know, and
you.
I'm just saying it, you know, as.
But I'm also saying, I did sign up for this. I look at some of our staff with kids and family, and I know all of you do too.
all of
I know
us,
that.
like, that's the
I
reality.
know that, I
If
know
you're
that.
talking about public safety,
Yep.
it's a matter of public safety for us, and when I say us, I should really exclude myself. I'm talking about mostly, you know, people of color, especially African American men, you know, having to be at high risk of, you know, injury or death because of police conduct. You know, that's a public safety matter also.
Well, what I would like to
Exactly.
see actually, and I do say this to police officers that, you know, they will say, and I'm not talking about a particular case, they will agree that something was a crime or inappropriate, they will agree, but they don't say that publicly. I think we need to get to a point where we and they can acknowledge that in a given situation, there was a crime committed.
Yes.
We're not at that point. We're not at that point at all. But that's a place we need to be. And we need, you know, when you look at cases, what you always see is character assassination of the victim, right?
Every time.
Every time. And to me, it doesn't matter. That person have loved ones, a family, a right to live. But we're in that space where they go back and pick out every last thing, you know,
Right.
and make it about that person's past. And we don't do that in other cases that don't involve police. So we have a long way to go in terms of changing culture.
We do. I would just say, as someone who has been in the fight for a long time, as a Black woman, mother, etc., I do want to challenge your office to be much more vigilant when it comes to looking at past cases. All of the excuses that these individuals make who don't want to peel back the curtain, this is what we've been dealing with for decades. And that's how we got here, right? To the point of finally the world paying attention when George Floyd was killed. But look how many bodies have been accumulated along the way, right? And look how hard it still is to get systemic changes within this system. So I would say that if not now, then when? If not you, then who? And you have the backing of the community to go back and look and to really push for accountability and to remind people that anybody's in this fight is putting their bodies on the line, putting their families, everything in jeopardy for the sake of justice. And prosecutors, if they're signing up, they're getting paid, they need to do their jobs or decide maybe this is not for me. And I know that may be a hard line, but it's just the reality of the evil that we have been dealing with for far too long. I just don't think we should give a pass because it's uncomfortable. And this is Black History Month, right? Where I'm saying is, looking at our history of martyrs who've had to put it all on the line and are only celebrated when they're 6 feet under and no longer a threat. But they kept showing up. That's the spirit that needs to be brought forward in this community in order for a huge shift to happen. We have a chance to lead the nation and not fall back because people don't have the political will to do the right thing. So I'm going to end my portion there as far as the questions. And I want to give you guys in the audience an opportunity.
I don't think we say thank you enough. I want to say thank you to Nikema for pulling our community together. We have some impacted families that are in the audience today, impacted families that have lost loved ones at the hands of the police here in the state, as well as impacted families who have lost their loved ones to being wrongfully incarcerated here in the state. So I want to tell you thank you to Nakima and everything that you just said, my sister, about, basically, if it's too much, then making a decision like this is too much for me, and I can't do it or I can't move forward. But we have people that have been sitting in the seats, such as Mike Freeman, that have literally pretty much tortured our community, right? Send people to jail along with Amy Klobuchar for crimes that they didn't commit, and then let officers walk free that have lynched, modern day lynched, our families, our people in the community. And so I am just, as someone who is raising my son and lives with this every single day, of the injustices being done around the United States, but particularly here in Minnesota, which Nakima calls the Jim Crow of the North. That's where we're at right now. And so thank you for that, Nakima. And then I want to say thank you to you, Mary, for, I remember when you were running for office, thank you for being a human being of integrity. Thank you for what you have fought for us thus far. And I know that it's hard and I know that it's scary because I have received death threats. So I understand the fear from the death threats. But I also walked through that fear, and I am a mother to a 17-year-old son, and I don't have a choice but to speak up against the injustices. And I'm okay with it. I've made my decision that if something happens behind that, then that's okay, because I know that I'm standing on righteousness and I know that I'm doing the right thing. So I really want to still tell you thank you for just being a good-hearted person and standing on righteousness and standing up for what you believe. And we can take this even further, and that I am willing, and I know that Nakima is willing, I know that Marvina is willing, and Michelle Gross, and all of us are willing to stand with you and to stand up for you and to fight for you, and that you won't be by yourself in this, and that we are willing to be by your side, because we know that you're helping to fight for us. We get it, we understand it, but there is an evil that is going on right now in this state, and we are at the epitome of corruption in this state, and it's going to take certain people. Many are called, but only few are chosen. It's going to take certain people to say enough is enough of hurting other human beings for no reason, Mike Freeman. Enough is enough, Amy Klobuchar. Enough is enough, Governor Walz. Enough is enough, Keith Ellison, from sitting back and watching these injustices happen to human beings and saying, I want to protect my political career. I don't want to do too much because I don't want to make certain people mad. We're going to make people mad because we're standing up against injustices and evil. So we don't have a choice. You're either going to do it or you're not going to do it. And that's just what it is. You're either in it or you're not in it. Martin Luther King, there was a part, I'm going to say this and I'm going to be quiet because I'm getting just worked up here, but there's a part where I was reading about Martin Luther King, and he says in his book where he thought about quitting so many times. He thought about, because he was getting the death threats, he was getting all this stuff against him, but he felt like he was too far in to go back now. We're in too far in to go back now. And you're in it with us now, Mary. You just held accountable. You got charges put on an officer that wrongfully killed somebody on the side of a highway. So the only thing that we can do is move forward now. But it is going to take those, and I know you may not have the capacity right now. I appreciate you saying that it is a willingness to get back into those other cases, because those cases is what led us to where we're at right now. We can't forget about those people, because the blood that has been shed is equally important. So I love you, my sister. I love you, my sister Nakima. Thank you both for doing this. Thank you as a black woman, a white woman sitting up there trying to figure this out, trying to talk it out and stand on righteousness. Thank you.
I wanted to say thank you to Shira. I'm also not going anywhere. believe there are families here that have lost loved ones, and I just wanted to recognize that.
How many cases do you think you'll be able to review in a year?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
How many cases do you think you'll be able to go back and review in a year?
What kind of cases? Are you talking about PISA, or are you talking about felony
Police
murder, or-
accountability.
Yeah.
She's talking about police accountability cases.
And do you have a team, are volunteers, paralegals, professionals able to volunteer their man hours? What can be done? What is the game plan?
Well, we did get, I made a budget request this year and did get staff for our conviction integrity unit. We are trying to, we did get that. We are trying to build out our staff to be able to handle, and you're talking about past police cases. I don't know the answer to that because we just have a lot of cases, like with conviction integrity, with PISA, with all of the things that we're doing. I don't know the answer to that. As I said, part of it is training people, having prosecutors who have the experience that can look at these cases. We're going to be working on that. We sent some prosecutors to a conference in California to learn about those cases. It's going to take, and I know this isn't an answer people want to hear, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to build up that capacity. But I want you to know, and you, Nikema, to know that I am committed to doing that.
Thank you. Yeah, P has some.
Hi, you know who I am. I'm Miss Harris, one of the impacted families who, we've already done the reinvestigation for you and handed it to you in my son's case. But just respectfully, I'm just here to say that those excuses aren't good enough. So my question is, because I do appreciate you nonetheless, what is it that the community can actually do to help, whatever steps? Can we sit down with a meeting with all of you? I understand you talked about the budget, but what steps can we do to quickly make this a reality? What Liz was talking about is, we do have, we literally do have people who will do this in all of their free time. They might not be the level of expertise that you need, but we can get you to that point where all that information's right there. So then that level that you need to rely on or whatever. But I've worked with the reinvestigation team and they probably are as good, if not better, than the reinvestigators you guys might have or the investigators you might have. We reinvestigate. So my question is what can the community do to help you make this a reality? Because the answer simply cannot be no.
Like, can we put together a team to review old case files and highlight things for you and cite things for you? I mean, at what point of this process are we able to?
Get involved.
Yeah, community wants to work with you to be better.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thank you, and I'm sorry for your loss, by the way, not only of your son, but of your partner. I'm sorry about that. It is, so I know, so these cases are complicated. And I know people don't like to hear that. It is kind of like, they are more complicated than non-law enforcement cases. And they do require investigation by particular people that can be called as witnesses. We have started in this, so let me take a step back. So there have sometimes been problems with getting statements from law enforcement. That has been a reality. One of the things that we have done is to convene a grand jury to call officers or subpoena them so that they have to give statements. Not asking the grand jury to make the decision, we make that, but that is a mechanism that we have used to make sure that we can get people to talk. Prosecuting a case requires And that this is, so in cases, we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and I find this comes up frequently. We might all agree that something happened here that shouldn't have happened. And at the same time, to be able to prosecute a case successfully, we have to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the thing happened. And it's even harder with officer cases because we have to disprove. We have to prove that what they say didn't happen. In other words, if they say, I used deadly force, we have to prove that it was not a reasonable use of deadly force beyond a reasonable doubt. And we have to be able to prove that, because we see a lot of cases like this, right, where we can see, hey, it never would have gotten to that point but for the fact that the police officer did X, Y, and Z, right? But the law is pretty narrow in telling us to look at right when it happens, right? So in that moment, that's not always the case. It isn't always the case. But in a lot of these cases, we have to look at what happened in that narrow moment. And you have to be able to prove in that narrow moment, beyond a reasonable doubt, it wasn't a reasonable use of force. That requires some training. It requires like a lens to look at a particular case that we need to have experts doing that. And by experts, I mean people who prosecute cases. I appreciate the community help. I think what would be helpful, when I say we don't have the resources, I would almost say, yeah, it would be nice to have the county board give us more money for that. But here's the issue. We're down, I think, 10 lawyers in our serious felony prosecutor unit. And that is just because those lawyers are in court every day. They try murder after sexual assault after sexual assault. And there are a limited pool of lawyers that have that experience and expertise, and we are in competition with them, with the Public Defender's Office, with the Attorney General's Office, with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And that is the one area where we are having difficulty recruiting, because that's just a small pool of people, and those are the people that need to make the decisions about whether we can prosecute a case. And so it's a difficult conundrum, and I know that's not helpful to people who've lost loved ones. My goal, we've started doing more comprehensive training in the office. We've hired a bunch of new people, but it's gonna take them some time to get up to speed. So I've talked about all the barriers, and I know that that's not a helpful answer. And I just keep saying, I am committed to doing that, and unfortunately, it is going to take us some time to get there.
I think we're okay with there being time. We also want to know how we can help bring it to fruition, right? Because beyond the county board, we could go to the legislature, we could go to philanthropy, if it's a resource issue.
Go recruit us some prosecutors with experience.
Okay.
Get our salaries up. Okay, here's one issue.
Yeah, that was an interesting.
It is.
So we'll have Mary answer and then we go to you.
Yeah, no, that is one concrete thing you can do, is to get, we don't have competitive salaries now with the public defenders. We lost some people to the U.S. Attorney, the Attorney General. Anoka County pays more for their prosecutors. So you can go to the county board. The contract is they're going to start negotiating for our staff, I think, in a couple of months. So go to the county board and say, we want you to pay prosecutors enough money so that they want to come to Hennepin County and prosecute cases. That is a concrete thing you could do.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lori, and I'm a resident of Brooklyn Center. And you mentioned that it's difficult to get your prosecutors to take these cases on for various reasons. We look at you as a leader. You're already setting new trends, and we appreciate that from community. But I would also ask you to be a leader for your own, and I'm sure you already are, But once you have a case and you win it, and you set that precedent in respect to police accountability, for example, CUAPB has had 2 cases this year with Marcus Golden and Cordell Handy that were successful. And because of that, CUAPB continues to hold police accountable in the respect of civil cases. But what we really need is police accountability and criminal prosecution. So I'm asking you to be a leader and say, we will offer you that protection. If you're getting threats, we will offer you protection within the law. Because as a community, we feel that, we know that fear, but we're still out there for free. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I didn't mention this, but part of working with law enforcement, in the past, my office, if something happened with police, as I remember talking to, or when I was a public defender, our office was talking to some supervisors in the county attorney's office saying, what are you going to do about this officer? And the answer was, we're not his employer. That is unacceptable. And so one of the things that we have been doing is when we see something on video, we ask our lawyers to flag that, and we will have a conversation with the police chief about a particular thing. And we've had those conversations. And sit down with the chief and the trainer and the person, if appropriate, to say, hey, we saw this, not a crime, but we saw this behavior, this language, this something or another that happened, and so far the chiefs have been great about that. And so that's a piece of it that's never existed before. It's we can be kind of an early accountability system in flagging things that we see law enforcement do, don't rise to the level of a crime, but we need to nip in the bud so it doesn't grow into something.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are doing that, we have been doing that. It's not, when I was talking about threats, I meant for our prosecutors. As you know, if you ever looked at Crime Watch Minneapolis or whatever that is, they put pictures of our prosecutors' faces on there. And yeah, they do. And so when I was talking about threats, I signed up for this, right? But a lot of our prosecutors didn't. And I understand what you're saying about they signed up to be a prosecutor, they can do this, but also, is that something they signed their family up for? Is that something that they want to do? But part of the big issue here when I say a lot of our prosecutors don't want to do this work, it's also a huge issue. They have gigantic caseloads right now. Huge caseloads of serious felonies. They are in trial back to back to back on murders, sexual assaults, and so when we have those huge caseloads, and we are taking measures to address those caseloads to free up at least some time when people can be looking at other cases as well. So I've mentioned a lot of different issues, but I just wanted to include that as well.
It sounds like a resource issue and a recruitment issue, being the two, because I
Yes.
believe there are prosecutors out there who
Yes.
would be open
Yes.
to prosecuting
Well,
these cases.
Also, I should say, traditional prosecutors, right, not maybe reform-minded prosecutors, aren't necessarily interested in prosecuting police,
Right.
right? And so there are people out there who could prosecute police, but don't see themselves as prosecutors. That's the last thing they ever thought they would be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of a weird kind of,
It's a cultural,
yeah,
but it's a problem that can be solved
yes.
with the right resources behind it. So I see Marvina has the mic, and then we'll go to, I think, Paul and Michelle.
Hello, Mary. My name is Marvina Haynes. I'm the founder of Minnesota Wrongfully Convicted Judicial Reform. I want to tell you and Kima both, thank you guys for having this forum and giving us the opportunity to ask questions. I hear us talk a lot about police, and police violence, particularly to our community. I'm born and raised right here in Minneapolis. As far as the prosecution initiative sentence adjustment goes, I want to talk about judges who have been found being corrupt and sending people to jail for a long time. My brother Marvin Haynes was exonerated thanks to you waiting on time. But when we think about Marvin's case and also Maya Burrell's case and many of the other families that my organization is fighting for, they all have the same judge, Fernstall, the same prosecutor, and judge, also Fernstall and Amy Cronshaw. Sorry, I was getting nervous in the time I started talking.
She was the county attorney.
Is there a way for us to look into the cases, because we have two people who had to be let out of jail due to corruption of the judicial system. Is there a way for us to look at those type of cases? And what are the resources from looking at those, and particularly between the years of 2002 to 2007?
Yeah, I actually started practicing in Hennepin County in 1990, and so those periods of time were when I was actually trying cases. So I'm well aware of things that I saw from prosecutors then. So the answer to that question, or part of it, is conviction review or conviction integrity. As you know, the AG's office has a conviction review unit.
They're not doing glacially slow.
So we are creating our own. We did get budget resources to do that. So we hope to have that up and running by the end of the year. We did just have a meeting with Carrie Spurman and members of the AG's office because right now we don't have that up and running. We also know there are most of the cases that they have are actually Hennepin County cases. And so ultimately, we will be reviewing the Hennepin County cases. But there's like the what happens between now and then. So we did have a very good conversation about better communication on the Hennepin cases and more collaboration there. But I'm well aware of the issues with prosecution in general in those years. And that is one of the reasons why we're building our own conviction review unit.
Okay, but the way that this prosecution initiative sentence adjustment work, they're not actually looking at actual claims of innocence.
Right.
And I love what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's going to bring a lot of hope and stuff for a lot of families. But what about the families who was put in prison for crimes that they didn't commit?
That's conviction integrity.
That's what the new unit that she's creating, that'll be out by the end of the year. That's specifically for innocence claims.
Okay.
Yes. And so the big difference there too, and for something Marvina mentioned, this is something you can all do too. There will be a bill at the legislature about post-conviction. When people when they get convicted and they want to go back to court because they may have new evidence or they've exhausted all their appeals, there are really limited time bars. You have to get into court within a couple of years. If you don't, it's kind of like tough luck. It doesn't matter if you are actually innocent. So what Marvina said about her brother's case, when her brother went to court or asked for post-conviction review, we could have said, too bad, you're past the 2 years, and a judge could not have heard it. I agreed to waive that, to allow them to go to court.
That was huge, y'all. That deserves. Because normally they fight it tooth and nail, even when there is evidence of innocence.
But that shouldn't be left up to individual prosecutors.
Thank you.
And so there will be a bill proposed at the legislature, and you should all be talking to legislators, telling them that you support a bill that changes that time bar.
Thank you
who's
for
carrying
that.
bill?
What?
Who's carrying that bill?
I know that we're.
Jamel, who's carrying that? Frazier.
Okay.
Jamel is our
Thank you.
legislative liaison back there.
Thank you. So we have Paul, and then we have Michelle. Oh, whoever has the microphone. Oh, go ahead. Okay.
My name is Paul Bossman. I'm an attorney with Communities United Against Police Brutality. Yeah, Michelle hired me away from Fremont County the day after I took a job there as a prosecutor. And I want to encourage you to look on this community as a resource. I'm not bragging because Jeff Storm said I had the best investigative team for the civil rights lawyers. You know, some of them are in the back. You should sometime take a look at what they did with Thurman Blood. So I understand the difficulty of taking 1,500 to 2,500 pages of BCA docs and video and audio, pictures, and digesting that. But if you want the Reader's Digest version, this is a better narrative, that's the stuff to look at. And I'm going to give you an easier question. Transparency is something we talk about a lot. One of the things that we work on a lot is data practices law. We're currently suing the BCA on behalf of 5 different families trying to cough up the BCA report. In some cases, 18 months after the commission. Families hear the press version of what happened that day. You hear the county attorney's version, you hear the cop's version, but they don't get to see the data. There is a part of 13.82, the section of data on law enforcement, subdivision 13, which says that the county attorney can provide crime victim data to the victims of crimes. We've tried to use that, and it's worked up in Lake County, but Ramsey County has told us, oh no, we've got the BCA stuff, but sometimes we do our own investigation. We're afraid the family is going to follow up our investigation, and they've refused to give us information from the family. And that's the law, they can do that. We'd ask your office to try and make that available to the families. We've spent, when we first started doing this, it's taken 12 to 14 months to get data. It's taken even longer now for the BCA to cough up that data. And your office can short circuit that, give information to families, give ammunition to civil attorneys who can do the research, who can help provide that information to your office. This community has a great deal of power for you. If you can look at that part of the data practices law, make it work.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we have a civil division, and a lot of people don't know that. So we have, as I said at the beginning, we do child protection, we do child support. We also have an entire civil division. It's a very interesting structure because our civil division represents all of the county departments and the county board and the county administrator. So our civil division represents the sheriff, for instance. And, you know, I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out how does all that work where my own civil division is defending people in ways that maybe I personally wouldn't agree with. And so the head of our civil division is named Beth Stack. And we've had a lot of conversations about that. And essentially there is a bit of a divide there, just in terms of separation of, they give, not a firewall really for me, but they give, so I can talk about policy. They don't advise, they advise departments on kind of risk management, right? Not policy. So they'll say, well, if you do this, they'll say it's illegal, or you could do it, but your liability is this, and just try to lay out the various options, but ultimately the policy part of it is up to the division head. One of the things that, and this does get back to your question, data practices. Some of the interpretations there about what comes under what we can't give away, we are in the process of hiring a data person, by the way, because we know we're getting a lot of data requests. But I think it's something we need to think at, because historically the county, law enforcement, nobody is transparent, right? Everybody's afraid of lawsuits and stuff like that. I believe in transparency. I think we do need to look a little bit at are we not handing over stuff we should be handing over? Are we kind of using data practices as kind of a shield to not hand stuff over? So I think it's something we really need to look at. We haven't yet gotten there, but that is something we need to look at.
Michelle?
Thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Mary. When people elected you, we elected you for a reason, and that therefore creates a huge amount of expectation on you. And we realize that, you're at your 1 year anniversary of, and so it's like, hurry up, make all these things happen. And so that's hard, and people have to understand that you came into an office that was in a great state of disarray and really had very little to no kind of practices and policies in place that needed to be there. Had a lot of very disgruntled employees, and people with wrong attitudes and all that stuff. So I want people to recognize that, recognize how hard you've worked, how much you've worked, but also knowing that what we know about you, we have this great expectation, right, of what's going to happen. And so we want to work with you and support you in that. One of the things I wanted to mention is that New York, I think they call it it's not the corporate council, but what they call I can't remember anyway, the prosecuting office for, Manhattan, has created a separate unit that prosecutes police. And I think the reason that that's important is this: I want to see police, I want to see police do what they're supposed to do, right? That's the first thing, everybody in the room wants. But I don't want to just see a look at deadly force cases. I think that if, a police officer beats up a 15-year-old kid for no good reason, whatever, engages in excessive force, that's also a crime. If they cause, significant bodily injuries or whatever, that makes it a felony. They ought to be prosecuted as if they committed a felony.
Right.
Why? Because when you prosecute cops for that kind of conduct, you will actually reduce the number of cops that are killed, the number of people that are killed by cops. We need to address things, before we get to that point, just like we always talk about nipping crime in the bud at a lower level. We need to be thinking like that with police also. And I recognize that some cops are not going to want to work with people. At the same time, they're cutting their own noses to spite their faces, because why? If they're trying to get a prosecution in a case that they worked up, and they won't work with your people, well, you guys are the ones that do the prosecution, so where are they going to go? Their case will not get prosecuted. Their victim that they're working with will not get satisfaction or relief of any kind. So, that's just going to be a price, and it'll be an adjustment. But, looking for those people that would be willing, and like I said, they have a special unit just specifically for that. And I think, and they understand, excessive force, and all the things around police, permissible uses of force, and all those kinds of things, and they develop expertise. I would advise you to consider a separate, specific unit to prosecute police, and not just for deadly force, but for all the crimes they commit. The corruption, we got a unit of cops up here on the north side that is engaged in some of the most corrupt behavior, that I think people in this room know what I'm talking about. Outrageous conduct of people who've committed no crimes, and nothing's happened to these guys, which is why they keep doing it. So any of that kind of stuff needs to be addressed.
Yeah, we've talked about that. I think ideally that is a good idea, because as you said, the people doing that work don't have to rely on police, or looking at those cases, I should say, because we do get investigations like that. The investigations that we get from the VCA are not all, some of them are accusations of sexual assault or physical assault or something like that. And it would be ideal to have a separate team that did that. Right now, we don't have those people. So I think ideally that would be the route that we go, and we have been talking about that actually, because I think you're right that having a team that's separated from the other work would be ideal.
Absolutely.
And has that specialty knowledge.
Yes, yes.
And that culture of understanding their role, and not a traditional prosecutor's role.
I'll talk to Elvin Bragg about where he got the money to do that, or the resources.
And I just wanted to add to that there. From the county's perspective, you could promote a coordinated accountability in the fact that we can't have Minneapolis, Ramsey County, Brooklyn Park, others that have committed to traffic stop policies, creating senses of alternative response programs, but then we have somebody like Brooklyn Center who won't do this thing here, and they're just as guilty out here of profiling and doing the things as anybody else is. And this is the thing about it is when we look at different situations, when we see certain stops and certain calls to certain situations, we see Minneapolis, Brooklyn Center, Crystal, all of them there together. So they're in unison dealing with these things, but if we don't have all of them doing the same things in the process of things, then it makes no sense at all here, that they all should be in a coordinated effort to be able to say, we're not pulling people over for having air fresheners in their rearview mirrors, or this particular type of thing. And a lot of it, and then the other thing so my question was, I don't know how you can interject into that to make this more of a concerted effort in pulling all those things together.
So a uniform
Yeah,
traffic stop policy.
yes, the way of saying, because I think from the county level, it should be something to where we can bring all this together and be able to do this the right way here and not have them running off and all of them on one, coming in together on different calls and then going out and willy-nilly everybody's doing their own thing here or like that, because it shouldn't be that way here. And a part of that is the other thing I wanted to see is a lot of that the paper trail starts from traffic court, really. I mean, they've had a history of, throwing tickets on our people, stopping them for anything, profiling, and then saying, okay, well, our people go to court because they feel that they've been done unjustly here. And then we got these lazy hearing officers and stuff. They don't want to hear anything from the people. It's like the officer's always right in those particular type of things. And we got to find some way to deal with that, because as we saw with Orlando Castillo, I mean, that's how they do. They say, well, we'll let those tickets stack up and things. And for a lot of our people, they turn into warrants. People can't always take off of work. People don't have the money. And people got to get to work. And so they'll still drive because they got to get to work to make the money to try to pay those things off here and everything. And a lot of that is a game, because they know that they get those people stuck in those situations. And people, like I said, they go to court and the hearing officer just got to hem and haw, sit there, and they get away with it and walk out of there like that. So, gosh, I had one.
I do have answers to two questions though.
Yeah. So
First,
I'll leave it alone because I totally forgot the other.
Two things. I believe there may be some legislation about the types of stops that police can make. That would be statewide. But in terms of county, we do have a really big opportunity here, which is called the consent decree. We know that Minneapolis has agreed that they will not be engaging in certain types of stops. We know that they're in the process of developing policy and then doing training, and that's taking some time here. But one of the things we've introduced or I've talked to the chiefs about in Hennepin, and I talked about this months ago, it was this. So, let me take a step back. So let's say MPD stops somebody after they've done their training and they have their policy, and they stop somebody for something that they're not supposed to. Let's say they find drugs or something, and then they submit that case to our office. Technically, they are in violation of the consent decree by engaging in that kind of stop. But what is the remedy for that? The remedy for that is really hauling them back to court, probably saying you're not supposed to be doing this. But another remedy could be, and we are in the process of talking to our office and thinking about what is our role as a Hennepin County attorney with the consent decree. We could legally charge cases that arise from stops that were improper, and I mean improper under the consent decree, not improper under the law. The consent decree doesn't apply to us. In other words, we're not a party to it. Neither is Brooklyn Center, Robbinsdale, whoever. It's or the sheriff or the state patrol. And so we are having these conversations, and I told the chiefs to start thinking about what are your thoughts about, once the consent decrees, 2 consent decrees are in place, what do you think is fair? What do you think our office should be doing? And if Minneapolis cannot stop somebody for whatever, do you think the sheriff or the state patrol should be able to stop somebody in Minneapolis for that same thing? Do you think just because you're in Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center or someplace just on the other side of Minneapolis, that those police should be able to stop somebody for the same thing that the consent decree bans? And so I said to them, I think you should start talking to your council members, your constituents, figure out what would be appropriate policy for you. So we're going to start pushing those conversations because we are going to be in a situation where we are going to have to decide, what do we do? Are we part of the spirit of enforcement of this? Yeah. And if so, does that only apply to MPD or does it apply to the sheriff and everybody else? So those are conversations we are about to start having. And those are conversations you should be having in your communities, especially if you're not from, if you are from Minneapolis, you should be talking to the sheriff, you should be talking to the state patrol, those agencies that operate in Minneapolis. If you're not from Minneapolis, you should be talking to your law enforcement, mayors, city council electeds about what you want to see in terms of those policies. Now, I do get, and actually when I talk to the chiefs about it, I get pushback on it. And people came in and said, are you gonna stop us from doing pretext stops or something like that? And I will often talk about the data, because the data is really critical in pretext stops. The data is huge, and so what I've said to them is, we should be looking at all of your data. Because in MPD, and we were looking at some of this when I was chief PD, we know that there are racial disparities, right? We know there are a ton of racial disparities. Practically everywhere you look in the country, there are going to be racial disparities. But the pushback was always stuff like, well, so-and-so has more of this or something like that. And so when I was chief PD, we asked for data from MPD, which allowed us to crunch some numbers. We got like a 19,000 line Excel spreadsheet. We crunched the numbers. It turned out for Black drivers who were stopped and searched, they found a gun in less than, half of 1% of the time. And so that's where you really get into, and I've said this to other chiefs, so it's not effective. It's not effective. So if you're gonna tell me, because the anecdote from chiefs is always, well, we're getting guns off the street, we're getting drugs off the street, we're really successful.
But they're not looking at the data.
Right, and so what I will say to them is, let's look at your data, because if you're getting lots of stuff off the street, then you're doing something different than every other chief in the country pretty much, and we need to be looking at that. Right. And the critical piece of the data too, and the data is why Minneapolis agreed to the consent decree. Some of the, we're not gonna do these particular things because those things are particularly related to the race data. We know that there are particular types of stops, and I'm not saying it's intentional, it could be intentional, not intentional, or whatever it is, we know that there are particular stops that are made based on race, because there's a bias, unconscious or otherwise, that they will find something. But when you look at the actual data, they don't. And I also say to chiefs, so, because I had one of them say, well, I think if you're getting a gun in less than half of 1% of the cases, that's one gun off the street. And I said, well, look at it this way. 99% of those cases, you had a black driver who was pulled over and searched. And I can imagine what that looks like or feels like in this day and age, inconvenienced, traumatized, whatever, for nothing. If you are really about building relationships in the community, that's not the way to do it. So arguing that it isn't effective is really critical. So I think pushing our suburb, everybody on their data is going to be really important, because I think it's easier for people to say, oh, we're getting this off the street, we're getting that off the street, and we need to look at the data. So countywide, that is a conversation we are about to get more serious about as we get closer to the consent.
Yeah, because we can't depend on the city councils and stuff. I mean, in reality, the city council doesn't want to look like they're anti-police. They want to look like they're back in the blue, you know, and so they're gonna go where the unions and them say go, and it does nothing for the citizens.
We're gonna take one more question.
Yeah, hi, my name is Emma. I'm with the reinvestigation work group. It's me and my family back there that do the reinvestigations. And we do have an attorney. But anyway, I just wanted to first thank Nikema, Mary, and Michelle as well for putting together this wonderful event. I think it was really beautiful and really informative, so thank you for your time, everybody. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I want to bring back to Police Deadly Force just a little bit more. You know, one of the things that we and my family do is we look at every aspect, like you're saying. We look at whether or not you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. We also look at the use of deadly force law. I actually wrote my master's thesis on the change in the deadly force law in 2020, and there's some very important changes that I'm sure you're aware of that I think should be noted in how we look at deadly force. So my question to you is, one of the things that we do is for every case, we looked at a lot of them, over 20 at this point. We write a report, and I want to know how useful is that report to you, what elements should be in a report that you and your office would take seriously and that would be useful to you. One of the things that we have done is we've hired expert witnesses. We've hired police use of force experts that we use typically in civil cases, but it may be used criminally. We've also hired forensic pathologists. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us specifically what would be of use to you from us.
Well, when I've met with people, Michelle, you know this, I've said, you know, give me everything you have, and we'll take a look at it. In terms of, sometimes what I hear from families is, well, not everything is in here, or something was missing from the report, or there's something that we want you to be aware of. And I'm not, you know, anything that you think you want us to know should be in there, and we will take a look at it. And so, I mean, sometimes I think I've heard people say, well, there's a video that's missing, there's something that went wrong with the video. So pointing out things that you see are important, because people miss stuff. So in terms of experts, we have certainly relationships with some experts. We look for certain things in experts, and depending on the case. And so we have those relationships and we can figure that out. But in terms of investigation, as I've said all the time, give me what you got. We'll take a look at it. If you think there's something important, put it in there. You think there's something we might miss, put it in there. If you think something's really obvious that you want us to take note of, put it in there.
So would you rather us just give you the data or actually spend the time writing a report?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by data. We would get an investigation from probably the BCA. And so sometimes you might go out and you might interview other witnesses that maybe they didn't interview. We would want to see those. And I don't know what you mean by data, but...
Yeah, like the BCA investigative data, like all of the files, transcripts of interviews, stuff like that.
We get that. from them, so we should have all of that, but if there's something you think we didn't get, then that should definitely be in there.
I think to the extent that you can supply that additional context and information, that is very helpful. Because the frame and the lens that you are coming from is countercultural to what the county attorney's office and other departments have typically done with police cases.
Well, and you have a different lens than law enforcement, and so there could be something completely, innocent that the VCA overlooked or just didn't think about, or not. But yeah, you have a different lens. Having different lenses is good, so definitely.
And just one final note too, I was thinking about the resource problem you're talking about with these cases. I'm gonna be going to law school in the fall, and one of the things that I would love is an opportunity to work in the prosecutor's office on these specific cases. So that's maybe a resource that you could tap into, maybe, 2 or 3 hours, something like that.
Let's give Emma a hand, future lawyer. All right. So did you guys enjoy this experience of having meaningful dialogue with the county attorney, which has been unprecedented as far as I'm concerned? I want to thank you all for taking the time to be here, for engaging in this discussion, asking thoughtful questions, and thinking through what's next as far as our push for justice. Because you guys can see, there is still so much work to be done, and simply because there are 2 consent decrees does not mean that the work is over. It's far from over. We have a real opportunity here. I want to thank Pete Gamades and Kimberly Milliard from the Racial Justice Network for helping to organize our time here tonight. They made my job really easy, so I'm grateful for them. I'm thankful to Michelle Gross and CUAPB. I'm thankful to Mary Moriarty, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, as well as her staff who showed up here today, and the fact that there is an opportunity for us to engage. Thank you to King Demetrius. Listen, for live streaming, remember to share. And again, thank you all for being here. Would you guys like to do this again in the future as there are more updates? Okay, well, we will commit to doing that on our end. Mary, any closing words?
I just appreciate you all coming out. I've talked about this before, that the system, the criminal legal system, has always been made much more mysterious than it should be. And I think that was designed to keep people from asking the hard questions about, is this working? And so one of my goals is to make it as accessible to everyone, to community as possible, because we all need you to be part of this. We need you to be speaking out about what you want, because this is your system. So thank you for showing up, and big Demetrius. Thank you for showing up, and I will be back at some point. Looking forward to the next conversation about how, we're just rolling out PISA next week. And as I said, we had our first felony murder case this morning, and conviction review is yet to come. So we have a lot of great things on the horizon, and I love to talk about the things that we're doing and hear what you guys have to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Let's give Mary a hand. For those who pray, please keep this woman in your prayers.
Can I just say to Mary, we all want you to know you have an army of constituents out here that got your.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Thank you, guys. Please take sandwiches that are left over, water. Thank you. Have a good night. We appreciate you.